The pre-dawn air hung heavy with autumn mist as Jacques de Molay, Grand Master of the Knights Templar, knelt before the modest wooden crucifix in his private chamber. Outside, Paris still slumbered, unaware of the machinery of betrayal already in motion. He touched the red cross emblazoned on his white mantle, a symbol worn for nearly 2 centuries by the warrior monks who had become the most powerful force in Christendom. "Protect your servants this day, Lord," he whispered, his breath visible in the chill air. At 63, Jacques felt every year in his bones, especially in the dampness of October, the wound in his side a souvenir from Acre 20 years. Past ached like a memory that refused to fade. A soft knock interrupted his prayers. "Enter," he commanded, his voice steady despite the unease that had plagued him for weeks. Brother Geoffroy de Charny slipped into the chamber, his face grave in the flickering candlelight. "Grand Master, our sentries report movement. Armed men, gathering near the temple precinct." Jacques nodded, unsurprised. "How many?" "Hundreds. Royal livery. They bear the king's standard." "So Philip makes his move at last." Jacques rose stiffly, crossing to the narrow window. The eastern sky had just begun to lighten, a blood-red line breaking the darkness. "Have our knights been alerted?" "Those in residence, yes. But we are few, most are scattered across our preceptories." Jacques turned to face his old friend. "This is happening everywhere, Geoffroy, not just in Paris. You foresaw this?" "I suspected. The rumors from the royal court, Nogrit's whispers in the king's ear. Our wealth has made us too tempting a target for a bankrupted crown." Jacques reached for his sword belt, buckling it with practiced hands. "We must preserve what matters most." Geoffroy's eyes widened. "The archives? Those that remain here, yes. But more importantly, the bloodline must survive." Jacques moved to his writing desk, withdrawing a sealed parchment from a hidden compartment. "If I am taken, this must reach Bernard de Villars at our commandery in Roussillon. He will understand what must be done." The distant sound of marching feet echoed through the stone corridors of the Paris temple. "There is no time," Geoffroy whispered. "There never is, at the moment of betrayal." Jacques pressed the parchment into Geoffroy's hand. "Find a way. The truth cannot die with us." As Geoffroy concealed the document within his tunic, a commotion erupted in the courtyard below. Jacques moved to the window once more. In the growing light he could see the royal soldiers forming ranks, their captain shouting orders. Behind them stood dark-robed men, the king's inquisitors. "They come in numbers suited for an army, not to arrest holy knights," Jacques observed. Bitterly, "Grand Master, we could barricade the inner keep. Some of our brothers could escape through." Jacques raised his hand, silencing the suggestion. "No, we are not common criminals to flee in the night. We are knights of the temple of Solomon, servants of God and his church." He straightened, his weathered face hardening with resolve. "We will face these accusations with dignity." The first pounding came at the main gate, echoing through the temple complex like thunder. "In the name of King Philip the Fourth of France, open." "These gates," Jacques nodded to Geoffroy. "Have the gates opened? Instruct our knights not to resist." As his lieutenant turned to leave, Jacques added, "And Geoffroy, remember Berenger Saunier. He guards the final cipher." The name seemed to steady the younger man, who nodded once before departing. Left alone, Jacques moved methodically around his chamber. He took a small silver key from around his neck and unlocked a modest chest beside his bed. From it he removed a simple wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. Inside lay a fragment of ancient parchment covered in Aramaic script, and beside it a small vial containing what appeared to be dried blood. "Not yet," he murmured. "The time has not yet come." He replaced the items, locked the chest, and slid it beneath his bed. Then he knelt once more before the crucifix, crossing himself with deliberate precision. The temple bells began to toll, prime as the first light of day filtered through the window. Jacques de Molay, Grand Master of the poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, rose to his feet and donned the white mantle of his order for what he suspected might be the last time. Heavy footsteps approached his door. Jacques stood facing it, his posture straight, his expression serene. "God wills it," he whispered, as the door burst open and armed men flooded into his chamber. William de Nogaret, keeper of the seals for King Philip IV, stepped forward with a parchment bearing the royal seal. His thin lips curved into a smile that never reached his cold eyes. "Jacques de Molay, you and all members of your order are hereby arrested on charges of heresy, blasphemy, and unnatural acts against God and His Church." Nogaret's voice dripped with satisfaction. "You will be taken to the royal prison to await questioning." Jacques regarded the man calmly. "On whose authority do you bring these false charges?" "The Templars answer only to His Holiness the Pope." "Pope Clement has been informed and has given his blessing to our investigation." The lie came easily to Nogaret's lips. Jacques knew better. Clement, that weak puppet, may have been told, but he would never have sanctioned this action against the Church's strongest defenders. This was Philip's doing. Philip and his insatiable hunger for the Templar treasury. As the soldiers moved to seize him, Jacques noticed the date on Nogaret's document. Friday, October 13th, 1307. The irony was not lost on him. 13, the number of attendants at the Last Supper. The number that had defined the Brotherhood since that fateful discovery beneath the Temple Mount. "You will find nothing," Jacques said, quietly as they bound his wrists. "We shall see," replied Nogaret. "I'm told the Inquisition can be most persuasive." As they led him from his chamber, Jacques caught a final glimpse of the crucifix on his wall. In that moment he silently renewed the oath he had taken 4 decades earlier in Jerusalem. The secret and the bloodline would survive, no matter. The cost. Behind him, the rising sun cast long shadows across Paris, marking the beginning of the darkest day in Templar history. Jerusalem, August 1119. 88 years earlier, heat shimmered above the ancient stones of Jerusalem as Hugh de Payens wiped sweat from his brow. The holy city had been in Christian hands for 20 years, yet pilgrims still fell prey to Saracen raiders on the road from Jaffa. Today, he had witnessed the aftermath of another such attack. 7 pilgrims slaughtered, their belongings scattered across the dusty road. "This cannot continue," Hugh muttered to his companion, Godfrey de Saint Omer, as they rode through the Damascus Gate. Both men were veterans of the First Crusade, knights who had remained in the Holy Land after Jerusalem's conquest. "What would you have us do?" Godfrey replied. "King Baldwin has too few men to patrol every road. Hugh's eyes narrowed as they passed the great golden dome that marked the site of Solomon's temple. Perhaps the duty falls to those who understand the sacred nature of this land. The two knights made their way to the quarters assigned to them near the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There, in the cramped room with its stone walls offering little relief from the heat, 7 other knights awaited them. All were French nobles who had fought to reclaim the Holy Land and now found themselves adrift in peacetime, their purpose diminished. André de Montbard, a thoughtful man whose quiet demeanor belied his ferocity in battle, spoke first. "What news from the coastal road?" Hugh shook his head grimly. 7 more souls sent to God before their time, women among them. A heavy silence fell over the assembled knights. "We swore oaths to protect the innocent," said Payan de Montadier, the youngest among them. "Yet we sit idle in Jerusalem while pilgrims die within sight of the holy places." Archambaud de Saint-Amand, whose family had lost lands and fortune to finance his journey to the east, leaned forward. "What if we were to form a brotherhood? Not just knights serving the king, but soldier monks dedicated to the protection of pilgrims?" Hugh exchanged a glance with Godfrey. "I have been considering something similar. A new kind of order bound by monastic vows but trained for warfare." "The Church would never sanction armed monks," objected Geoffroy Bizzle, always the pragmatist. "They might," countered Hugh, "if we secured the blessing of the Patriarch of Jerusalem and presented our case properly to His Holiness." As night fell over Jerusalem, 9 knights swore a solemn oath by candlelight. They would dedicate themselves to the protection of pilgrims and the defense of the Latin kingdom of Jerusalem. They would live as monks, embracing poverty, chastity, and obedience while wielding swords against the enemies of Christ. King Baldwin II, grateful for their service, granted the fledgling order quarters on the Temple Mount, in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, believed to be built upon the ruins of Solomon's temple. The humble knights became known as the poor fellow soldiers of Christ, and of the Temple of Solomon, the Knights Templar. For 9 years, the original brothers recruited no new members, maintaining their vows in obscurity. They adopted as their seal the image of 2 knights riding a single horse, symbolizing their poverty and brotherhood. On a sweltering summer afternoon in 1128, Hugh de Payens stood in the coolness of the vaulted chamber beneath the Temple Mount. Their excavations, ostensibly to expand their living quarters, had led them deeper into the bedrock than any had ventured since the time of Herod. "Master Hugh," called André de Montbard, his voice echoing strangely in the darkness, "we've found something." Hugh lifted his oil lamp and made his way carefully through the narrow passage. The other knights had gathered around a section of wall that appeared newer than its surroundings, built, perhaps during the Roman period. "There's a void behind it," explained André. "The sound is different." Hugh pressed his hand against the stones, feeling the slight movement of air. "Break through," he commanded, carefully. It took hours of painstaking work to create an opening, large enough for a man to pass through. When at last they succeeded, Hugh was the first to squeeze through the gap, lamp held high. The chamber beyond was small, perhaps 10 paces across, its walls adorned with faded symbols that appeared to blend Hebrew characters with other older forms. But it was the stone chest in the center that drew Hugh's attention. "In the name of God," he whispered, crossing himself. The other knights joined him, forming a circle around the ancient ark. "Should we open it?" asked Godfrey, his voice hushed with reverence. Hugh nodded slowly. "God has led us here for a purpose." Together they lifted the heavy stone lid. Inside lay several scrolls wrapped in deteriorating linen, a collection of small artifacts including a cup of simple design, and most curiously, a sealed clay jar inscribed with Aramaic text. "Can anyone read this?" Hugh asked, lifting the jar carefully. Andre Acute, who had studied with Jewish scholars in France, leaned closer. "It speaks of blood, preserved blood, of... I cannot make out the name. The script is too damaged." Hugh placed the jar back in the chest with trembling hands. "We must translate these scrolls. Whatever secrets they hold, God has entrusted them to our keeping." Over the following months, working in secret with the help of a converted Jewish scholar, the Knights began to understand the magnitude of their discovery. The scrolls contained genealogies dating back to the time of Christ, along with accounts written by early followers that differed markedly from the accepted Gospels. And the blood in the clay jar, according to the accompanying text, had been preserved by Joseph of Arimathea himself. "If these documents speak truly," Hugh said to his brothers one night, gathered in the deepest chamber beneath the temple, "then everything we believe about the Holy Family may be built upon omissions." "Blasphemy," whispered Payan, though without conviction. "Truth," countered Hugh. "A truth the Church may not be ready to hear. What shall we do with this knowledge?" asked Godfrey. Hugh gazed at the ancient texts spread before them. "We protect it, as we have sworn to protect all that is sacred. And we watch for signs of those whose bloodline is documented in these pages." By 1129, when Hugh traveled to the Council of Troyes to seek official recognition for the Templar order, he carried with him secrets that would have shaken Christendom to its foundations. There, with the support of Bernard of Clairvaux, the Knights Templar received the blessing of Pope Honorius II and a rule written by Bernard himself. No one outside the original 9 knights ever learned what truly lay beneath the Temple Mount. But as the order grew in size and influence over the decades that followed, so too did their secret mission to protect not just pilgrims to the Holy Land, but a bloodline that traced its origins to the very foundations of Christianity itself. And as Jerusalem fell once more to Muslim forces in 1187, the Templars ensured that their most precious discoveries were safely transported to their strongholds in Europe, where the greatest secret of all would take root in the soil of southern France. Temple Mount, Jerusalem, 1135. The oil lamp cast elongated shadows across the subterranean chamber, as Bernard de Clairvaux carefully unrolled the ancient parchment. His fingers, more accustomed to holding a quill than handling delicate artifacts, trembled slightly. Behind him, Hugh de Payens watched in silence, his weathered face revealing nothing of the turmoil within. "You understand what you're asking of me, Hugh?" Bernard spoke without looking up, his eyes fixed on the Aramaic script. "If these texts contain what you believe, I ask only that you read them, Bernard, with your own eyes and heart, then judge." Bernard had not expected to find himself here, deep beneath the Temple Mount, when he journeyed to the Holy Land to visit the order he had helped legitimize. As the most influential Cistercian abbot in Christendom, and the man who had written the Templar rule, he had come to see how his spiritual sons fared. Instead, he found himself confronted with documents that threatened to undermine the very foundations of the church. "This genealogy," Bernard murmured, tracing the lines with his finger, "it cannot be authenticated. The seal at the bottom bears the mark of Joseph of Arimathea." Hugh replied, "The same mark appears on documents in Rome that the church accepts as genuine." Bernard's sharp eyes flicked to the clay jar sitting on the stone table. "And that contains?" "Blood, preserved by methods known to the Essenes. The scroll identifies it as belonging to the man named in the genealogy." For hours, Bernard read by lamplight, occasionally asking questions in his precise, logical manner. Outside, Jerusalem baked under the summer sun, pilgrims and merchants going about their business, unaware of the drama unfolding beneath their feet. Finally, Bernard carefully rolled the parchment and secured it with its silk binding. His face, always austere, had grown even more solemn. "If these accounts are true," he said quietly, "they do not negate our faith, Hugh. They humanize it." Hugh released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Then you understand why they must be protected. From the church?" Bernard raised an eyebrow. "From those within the church who would destroy anything that challenges their power," Hugh clarified. "You know as well as I that there are princes of the church who serve earthly ambitions above heavenly ones." Bernard steepled his fingers, his brilliant mind calculating implications and possibilities. "What do you intend to do with this knowledge?" "Guard it and watch for those who carry this bloodline still." "You believe descendants live?" Hugh nodded. "The genealogy continues to within living memory. The last entries speak of a family that fled to Gaul during the persecutions under Nero. They settled in what is now Septimania." Bernard's eyes widened slightly. "The Languedoc?" "Yes, where rumors of unorthodox beliefs have persisted since the earliest days of Christianity." "The Cathars," Bernard whispered. "Perhaps they guard pieces of this truth, though wrapped in their own interpretations." Hugh leaned forward. "Bernard, we need allies within the church. Men who understand that faith can withstand truth." The abbot was silent for a long moment. "I will help you, Hugh, not to undermine the church, but to protect it from its worst impulses." He touched the clay jar with reverence. "This blood and the bloodline it represents must be safeguarded." As they emerged from the underground chamber, blinking in the harsh sunlight, neither man noticed a figure withdrawing into the shadows of a nearby archway, a young Templar knight named Gerard de Rydefort, whose ambition would one day lead him to betray the very secrets he had overheard. Ch. Ato de Montségur. Languedoc, 1244. Bertrand de Blanchefort, Grand Master of the Knights Templar, watched grimly as smoke rose from the pyre at the foot of the mountain. The siege of Montségur had ended as all knew it would, with fire and death for the Cathar perfecti who had sought refuge in the remote fortress. 200 burned, murmured Raymond de Pereil, lord of Montségur, who stood beside him on the hidden ridge overlooking the scene. Men and women whose only crime was to seek God in their own way. Bertrand's jaw tightened beneath his graying beard. The Pope's crusade against the Cathars served many masters, not all of them heavenly. 4 nights earlier, under cover of darkness, 4 Cathar leaders had escaped the doomed fortress, carrying with them precious relics and documents that could not be allowed to fall into the hands of the Inquisition. Templar knights, secretly sympathetic to the persecuted sect, had guided them through mountain passes known only to local shepherds. Did they reach safety? Raymond asked, his voice barely audible over the distant crackle of flames. Our brothers escorted them to the coast. They sail for Cyprus tonight, and from there to our preceptory in Scotland. Bertrand turned from the grisly spectacle below. The scrolls are secure. Raymond nodded, relief momentarily softening the grief etched on his face. Then something survives of our knowledge. More than something, Bertrand assured him. They bloodline continues, hidden now among families who appear to be devout Catholics, and the evidence of their heritage is protected by our order. For how long? Raymond's question hung in the chill mountain air. The Templars grow too powerful, too wealthy. Already there are whispers of envy from the crowns of Europe. Bertrand's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the rugged landscape of the Languedoc, a land now broken by crusade and inquisition. We have made preparations. The truth is never entrusted to a single vessel. He did not elaborate, and Raymond knew better than to ask. The less he knew of Templar secrets, the less he could reveal under torture should he be captured. As they mounted their horses to begin the dangerous journey back to Templar lands, Bertrand added quietly, Remember the cipher, Raymond. 3 points form the triangle. 7 seals guard the cup. 13 generations from master to apprentice. And the blood reveals all. Raymond completed the coded phrase. They rode in silence as the sun set behind the Pyrenees, casting long shadows. Across a land where ancient knowledge and bloodlines now survived, only in whispers, hidden texts, and carefully concealed symbols. Paris, 1153, André de Montbard, 5th Grand Master of the Knights Templar, felt the weight of his 80 years as he climbed the narrow stairs to his private chamber in the Paris temple. Age had bent his once straight back and frosted his beard, but his mind remained sharp, a blessing and a curse, for it allowed him to see clearly the dangers gathering around the order he had helped found. A knock at his door interrupted his troubled thoughts. Enter, he called, settling himself in the chair beside the small brazier that took the autumn chill from the air. Brother Bertrand de Blanchefort, 40 years his junior, and recently returned from the Holy Land, stepped into the room and bowed. You wished to see me, Grand Master? Andre gestured to the stool across from him. Sit, Bertrand. My old bones protest at formality these days. As Bertrand sat, Andre studied him carefully. The younger knight had proven himself not just on the battlefield, but in the delicate diplomacy required with both Muslim rulers and Christian kings. More importantly, he was one of the few fully initiated into the Order's deepest secrets. I am dying, Bertrand, Andre said without preamble. Perhaps not today or tomorrow, but soon enough that preparations must be made. Bertrand's face remained composed, though sorrow flickered in his eyes. The Order will mourn deeply when that day comes, Master. The Order must do more than mourn. It must survive what is coming. Andre leaned forward. You have read the portents as well as I. Jerusalem will fall again within our lifetimes. The holy places will return to Muslim hands. We fight to prevent, we fight, Andre interrupted gently, but we may not win, not permanently. The cycle turns, Bertrand. What we must ensure is that certain knowledge survives regardless of who holds the stones of Jerusalem. From beneath his mantle, Andre withdrew a small leather pouch. I have chosen you to succeed me as Keeper of the Covenant. Not as Grand Master that, will be decided by the chapter, but as guardian of what we found beneath the temple. With reverent hands he emptied the pouch onto the table between them. A silver key, a small vial of dark, dried substance, and a parchment sealed with wax impressed with a symbol that was neither fully Christian nor entirely something else. The key opens a chest in our preceptory at Rosslyn, Andre explained. The vial contains earth mixed with the blood we discovered. And the parchment, decipher? Bertrand asked. ANDR, Acute nodded. The location of every copy of the scrolls, every artifact we recovered, and the names of the families who carry the bloodline. He touched the dried contents of the vial. This can verify a true descendant should the need arise. The blood calls to blood. Bertrand hesitated before accepting the items. Master, would you not rather entrust this to your nephew? Andre smiled sadly. Bernard is a great man, perhaps the greatest mind in Christendom. But he serves the Church first, and these secrets, they belong to something older, something that existed before men organized faith into institutions. As Bertrand carefully returned the sacred objects to their pouch, Andre added, There is one more thing you should know. The Languedoc is key. Whatever happens to our order, whatever becomes of our mission in the East, the bloodline must be protected there. The descendants have a role to play that even I cannot fully discern. I will guard them with my life, Bertrand vowed. Guard them with more than that, Andre replied. Guard them with secrecy, with cunning, and with patience. The time is not yet right for the truth to be known. Perhaps it will not be right for centuries to come. As darkness fell over Paris, 2 knights of an order that had grown from 9 poor soldiers to the most powerful military and financial force in Christendom spoke long into the night. They spoke of hidden chambers beneath ancient churches, of scrolls concealed within the carvings of Gothic cathedrals, of symbolic references embedded in artwork commissioned by secret sympathizers, and they spoke of a bloodline that connected the present to the distant past, a living link to the very origins of the faith they had sworn to defend, even if that defense required protecting certain truths from the Church itself. When dawn broke, Bertrand de Blanchefort left the chamber, bearing not just physical artifacts, but the weight of a sacred trust that would eventually lead the Templars to their doom and beyond. Rennes-le-Château, Languedoc, 1271. The small stone church of Saint Mary Magdalene stood silent in the gathering dusk, its weathered walls bearing witness to centuries of prayer and secrets. Inside, illuminated only by candlelight, 2 men bent over a weathered parchment spread across the altar. You see how the bloodline continues unbroken, murmured Father Antoine Bigot, his gnarled finger tracing the genealogy down to a name near the bottom. Through the female line always, mother to daughter since the time of the exile. Guillaume de Beaussus, recently elected Grand Master of the Knights Templar, studied the document with intense concentration. His journey to this remote village in the Languedoc had been made in secret, away from the prying eyes of both church and crown. And the current vessel? He asked, using the code that had been established generations earlier. Father Bigot gestured toward the darkened doorway. She waits outside, 17 years of age, recently married to the Lord of Blanchefort. She does not know her full heritage yet, only that she guards something precious in her blood. Guillaume nodded. The time is not yet right for full revelation. The conflict between Pope Gregory and the kingdoms of Europe grows more dangerous. We must be cautious. The priest carefully rolled the parchment and returned it to its hiding place beneath a flagstone under the altar. There is more, my lord. Something we discovered when renovating the ancient crypt. He led Guillaume down worn stone steps into the small crypt beneath the church. There, behind a newer wall, a cavity had been revealed during repairs. From it, Father Bigot withdrew a clay jar sealed with wax and inscribed with symbols similar to those Guillaume had seen on Templar artifacts. We found this, along with several scrolls written in a form of Aramaic I cannot decipher, the priest explained. I believed it should remain here, hidden until I could consult with your order. Guillaume took the jar carefully, turning it to examine the inscriptions in the flickering torchlight. You were right to wait. This appears to be one of the vessels described in our oldest records, one we believed lost during the fall of Jerusalem. What does it contain? Father Bigot asked. If it is what I suspect, it holds earth from the tomb, mixed with preserved blood. Guillaume's voice grew hushed. A relic of incalculable significance. Should it not be in a more secure location? Perhaps your treasury in Paris? Guillaume smiled grimly. No place is truly secure, Father. The greatest protection lies in obscurity. This remote church, this small village that few have heard of, what better hiding place? Additionally, it seems fitting that it should rest near one who carries the bloodline. After examining the scrolls, which confirmed his suspicions about the jar's contents and origin, Guillaume instructed Father Bigot on the creation of a complex cipher, a system of clues embedded in the very architecture of the church, that would guide future initiates to the hidden relics. We will provide funds for the renovation of this church, he promised. Artisans loyal to our cause will incorporate symbols that appear Christian to casual observers, but speak other truths to those with eyes to see. Before departing, Guillaume met briefly with a young woman who unknowingly carried a bloodline older than the church itself. Marie de Blanchefort stood proudly in the church anteroom, her dark eyes curious but respectful. Your family has served God faithfully for generations, Guillaume told her, choosing his words carefully. The task passes now to you to preserve what has been entrusted to your lineage. I know only what my mother told me, Marie replied, that we guard a secret in our blood, and that when the time comes we will recognize those sent to help us. Protect it. The Knights Templar stand as your guardians, my lady. Should you ever have need, send word through Father Bigot or his successors. As Guillaume rode away from Rennes' chateau, he pondered the strange convergence that had brought a Templar artifact and a descendant of the bloodline to the same remote location. Coincidence, perhaps, or divine providence guiding the separate strands of their sacred mission together as storm clouds gathered on the horizon. For Guillaume de Beaujeu, like his predecessors, understood that the Order's days of unfettered power might be numbered. Already the jealousy of kings and the suspicion of popes had begun to erode the special privileges granted to the Templars. Preparations must be made for the preservation of their greatest secrets. Should the unthinkable occur, Cyprus 1291, the fall of Acre burned in Thibaut Gaudin's mind like an open wound. The last major Christian stronghold in the Holy Land had finally succumbed to the Sultan's forces after a brutal siege. As the newly elected Grand Master of the Templars, the burden of this catastrophic loss fell heavily upon his shoulders. Now, in the relative safety of Cyprus, he sat alone in his sparse chamber, surrounded by the most secret documents of the Order documents that had been evacuated from Acre just days before its fall. A knock at the door interrupted his grim reflections. "Enter," he called, hastily covering the ancient scrolls with a more innocuous map. Jacques de Molay, Marshal of the Order and commander of its fighting forces, stepped into the room. Though only in his mid-40s, Jacques' face showed the strain of the recent defeat. He had led the last desperate defense of the Templar compound in Acre, before being forced to evacuate by sea. "You asked to see me, Grand Master?" Thibaud gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit, Jacques. What I must discuss cannot be overheard." When the younger knight was seated, Thibaud spoke in a low voice. "The loss of the Holy Land changes everything. We are retreating to our preceptories in Europe, but we face new dangers there. The French king grows increasingly hostile, and Pope Nicholas is not the steadfast ally his predecessors were." Jacques nodded grimly. "Philip needs money for his wars. Our treasury tempts him. Indeed, which is why we must secure our most precious possessions, not gold or property, but knowledge." Thibaud carefully uncovered the ancient scrolls. "You have been partially initiated into our deepest mysteries, but the time has come for you to know all. One day soon you may need to lead our order through its darkest hour." Through the night, Thibaud revealed to Jacques the full extent of the Templar's secret, the discoveries beneath the Temple Mount, the hidden bloodline they had sworn to protect, and the network of safe havens established throughout Europe where descendants lived under the Order's distant protection. "The Languedoc remains crucial," Thibaud explained, indicating a region in southern France on a weathered map. Despite the Albigensian Crusades' attempt to root out unorthodox beliefs, the bloodline survives there, hidden among seemingly ordinary families. And our artifacts, the physical evidence, distributed across our most secure preceptories. Some in Scotland, beyond the reach of Rome. Others in Portugal, where King Dinas favors our order. The most important remain in France, hidden in plain sight within churches and cathedrals built by masons loyal to our cause. Jacques studied the cipher key that would allow him to interpret the symbolic language embedded in these structures. And if the worst should happen, if our order faces dissolution, Thibaud's expression grew solemn. Then you must ensure the knowledge survives, even if the order does not. We have contingencies families who will shelter our brothers, repositories known only to the highest-ranking members, codes that can be passed through generations until the time is right for the truth to emerge. When will that time come? Jacques asked. I cannot say, perhaps not for centuries. But the bloodline must continue, unbroken, until then. Thibaud placed his hand on the oldest scroll, its parchment fragile with age. This is our true mission, Jacques. Not the recovery of Jerusalem, not the amassing of wealth, but the protection of a truth so profound it could transform or shatter Christendom. As dawn broke over Cyprus, casting golden light across a chamber filled with ancient secrets, Jacques de Molay accepted the burden that would eventually lead him to a fiery death in Paris. But on that morning, neither man could foresee the treachery that awaited, nor the centuries-long shadow their order would cast across European history. I swear by all that is holy, Jacques vowed, that these truths will not perish, no matter what befalls us. Thibod nodded, satisfied. Then let us prepare. The battle for Jerusalem may be lost, but the greater war, the war for truth, continues. Paris, 1306. King Philip IV of France called Philip the Fair for his comely appearance rather than any moral quality, stood at the window of his private chamber in the Louvre Palace. Below, the city of Paris sprawled in the spring sunshine, its citizens going about their business, unaware of the plans taking shape in the mind of their sovereign. The Templars hold how much in their Paris treasury? Philip asked, not turning from the window. Jean de Nogret, keeper of the seals and the king's most trusted adviser, consulted the parchment in his hands. Our spies estimate 200,000 livres in gold alone, not turning from the window. Guillaume de Nogret, keeper of the seals and the king's most trusted adviser, consulted the parchment in his hands. Our spies estimate 200,000 livres in gold alone, your majesty. Perhaps twice that in silver and jewels. And that accounts only for what we can verify in Paris. Their commanderies across France hold additional fortunes. Philip's long fingers drummed against the stone windowsill. The early spring breeze carried the scent of the Seine and the earthy aroma of Paris, not all of it pleasant. He inhaled deeply nonetheless, savoring the smell of his power, his city. And their lands? He asked, his voice soft but edged with hunger. The order holds over 9,000 estates throughout Christendom, sire. In France alone, their properties would increase the royal domain by nearly 1/3. Nogret's voice remained measured, but a gleam of avarice flickered in his cold eyes. They have become a state within your state. Philip turned at last, his handsome face the face that had earned him his misleading epithet, revealing nothing of his thoughts. At 38 he still cut an impressive figure, tall and fair, with piercing blue eyes that seemed to dissect those upon whom they fell. A state within my state, he repeated softly, and answerable only to Rome, not to their rightful king. Nogret inclined his head in agreement. A dangerous anomaly, sire, and one that grows more dangerous by the day. Tell me of their Grand Master. Philip moved to the heavy oak table that dominated the center of the chamber, pouring himself wine from a silver pitcher. He did not offer any to Nogret. Jacques de Malay, 62 years of age, a Burgundian from a minor noble family. He has led the order for 14 years, since the death of Thibaud Gaudin. Nogret set aside his parchment, having committed its contents to memory. He is well respected, known for his piety and military skill, though he has grown more contemplative in recent years. Contemplative? Philip arched an eyebrow. What do you mean? Our informants report frequent private meetings with selected knights, discussions that cease when others approach, and curious travels to remote Templar preceptories with no apparent military or financial purpose. Philip swirled the wine in his goblet, watching the ruby liquid catch the light. You suspect they hide something beyond mere wealth. It wasn't a question, but Nogret answered anyway. I do, your majesty. The rumors have persisted for generations. Heretical practices, secret rituals, knowledge, and relics recovered from the Holy Land that never reached the church as they should have. Pope Clement is my creature, Philip mused, my puppet placed on Peter's throne by French influence. Yet even he is reluctant to move against the Templars without irrefutable evidence of wrongdoing. Nogret stepped closer, lowering his voice though they were alone in the chamber. Evidence can be manufactured, sire. The Inquisition has methods to extract confessions that would satisfy even the most skeptical observer. A thin smile curved Philip's lips. And what charges would these confessions support, my faithful Guillaume? Heresy, of course, denial of Christ, idol worship, perhaps a head of some kind, as the rumors already suggest. Homosexual practices among the Brotherhood, spitting on the cross during their secret initiations. Nogret's normally expressionless face grew animated as he warmed to his subject. The charges need only be plausible enough to justify their arrest and the seizure of their assets. Once we control their persons and their wealth, the rest will follow naturally. Philip set down his wine and walked to a large chest bound with iron. From it he withdrew a rolled parchment sealed with royal wax. "I have already drafted the orders," he said. "They require only the date of execution." Nogret's eyes widened. Slightly the closest he came to showing surprise. "You have anticipated me, sire. Great minds, Guillaume." Philip's smile did not reach his eyes. "The question remains, when to strike. We must move simultaneously against all Templar establishments in France. No warning can reach them. They are at their most vulnerable when divided," Nogret advised. "De Molay has called a chapter meeting of senior knights for early October. Many will be traveling, their forces dispersed." Philip nodded slowly. "October, then? Let us plan for Friday, the 13th. An auspicious day for purging heresy from our realm, wouldn't you say?" "Most auspicious, your Majesty." Nogret bowed, already calculating the logistics of arresting thousands of knights across France on a single day. "In the treasury, we should have men ready to secure it immediately." "Of course." Philip returned to the window, gazing out at the spires of Notre Dame rising above the city. "But there is something else, Guillaume. Something I want you to personally oversee. Sire, these ... private meetings de Molay conducts, the remote preceptories he visits." Philip's voice hardened. "I want to know what secrets the Templars guard beyond their gold. Search their archives before they can be destroyed. Question their senior knights most thoroughly on matters beyond mere ritual. You suspect political conspiracies? Plots against the crown?" Philip turned, his blue eyes cold as winter sky. "I suspect knowledge, Guillaume. Knowledge is power, often more valuable than gold. The Templars have spent 2 centuries accumulating both. I intend to possess everything they have hoarded." As Nogret bowed and withdrew to begin preparations for what would become one of history's most notorious acts of state-sanctioned treachery, Philip returned his gaze to the city below. The Templar enclave was visible from his window a-walled. City within his city, wealthy, powerful, independent. Soon, he thought, soon all of it would be his. The gold, the lands, and whatever secrets the warrior monks had kept hidden for 2 centuries. Little did the King of France suspect that the greatest Templar treasure would prove far more elusive and far more dangerous than mere gold. Templar. Preceptory, Poitiers, summer 1306. Jacques de Molay knelt before the small altar in his private chamber, the familiar weight of his white mantle heavy across his shoulders. Though the summer night was warm, a chill seemed to emanate from the ancient stones beneath his knees, a chill that reached into his bones, whispering warnings he could not quite discern. Grant me clarity, Lord, he murmured, his weathered hands clasped before him. The signs multiply, the shadows lengthen. Guide your servant in these uncertain times. A soft knock interrupted his prayers. Jacques crossed himself and rose stiffly, his joints protesting after an hour of kneeling. "Enter," he called, recognizing the pattern of the knock, 3 short raps followed by 2 longer ones, the private signal used only by his most trusted circle. Geoffroy de Charnay, preceptor of Normandy, slipped into the chamber and bowed. "Forgive the interruption, Grand Master." "There is nothing to forgive, old friend." Jacques gestured to a simple wooden chair. "What news?" Geoffroy's face was grave in the flickering candlelight. "Our agent at court has sent warning. King Philip's tax. Collectors have been instructed to prepare for a significant acquisition of resources before the year's end." "The king is always hungry for gold," Jacques observed, seating himself across from his visitor. "His wars with Flanders have drained the royal coffers. This is different." Geoffroy leaned forward, lowering his voice, though they were alone. "The instructions specifically mention properties and movable wealth currently held in trust for the Church. Only the Templars and Hospitallers match that description, and the Hospitallers have already negotiated their tribute." Jacques steepled his fingers, considering. "And our brothers in Rome? What do they report of Pope Clement's position?" "Continued weakness. He dares not oppose Philip openly, not while French cardinals dominate the Curia." Geoffroy's expression darkened. "There are also rumors of an investigation, whispers of heresy charges being formulated against our order." "Based on what evidence?" Jacques asked sharply. "None that I can discover. But evidence has never been a requirement for the Inquisition, merely an enhancement to their proceedings." The 2 men fell silent, each contemplating the implications. For decades, the Templars had weathered periodic storms of suspicion and envy. Their wealth, their independence from local authority, their dual nature as both warriors and monks, all had bred resentment among those who coveted their resources or resented their power. "We must accelerate our contingency plans," Jacques said finally. "The sacred artifacts must be moved from Paris immediately to Scotland?" Jacques nodded. "Some to Scotland, beyond Philip's reach. Others to Portugal, where King Dinas remains our ally. The most critical items, double quotes, he hesitated. Those I will entrust to our brethren in the Languedoc." Geoffroy's eyes widened slightly. "You believe the danger is that imminent?" "I have lived long enough to recognize the gathering of wolves, Geoffroy." Jacques rose and moved to a small, iron-bound chest in the corner of his austere chamber. From it he withdrew a sealed parchment, bearing no external markings. "This contains the cipher that unlocks our greatest secret, the location of the repositories and the identities of the bloodline families who remain under our protection. Should it not remain in the Paris Treasury vault? No place controlled by the order is truly safe if Philip moves against us." Jacques pressed the document into Geoffroy's hands. "Memorize the contents, then burn it. Share the knowledge only with the 4 knights we selected at our last conclave." Geoffroy accepted the parchment with reverence. "And the physical evidence? The artifacts themselves?" "I will oversee their dispersal personally." Jacques returned to the chest and removed a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. "This, however, comes with us to Paris. We may have need of it before the end." What does it contain? Geoffroy asked, though something in his tone suggested he already knew or suspected. Jacques opened the box briefly, revealing a glass vial of dark, dried substance nestled in a bed of silk. The means to recognize the true bloodline should all other records be lost or destroyed. Blood calls to blood, Geoffroy. It always has. As he secured the box inside his tunic, Jacques added, "Summon our most trusted knights to Paris for October. We will hold a formal chapter meeting. Let Philip's spies report that. But our true purpose will be to complete the dispersal of our most sacred trust. And if we are betrayed before then..." Jacques' weathered face revealed nothing but his eyes, the eyes of a man who had spent a lifetime and battle-hardened with resolve. "Then the order may perish, but its mission will survive. We have prepared for this possibility since the fall of Acre. The truth is hidden in stone and blood, in cipher and song. It will endure long after we are dust." Outside the window, a nightingale began to sing, its pure notes rising into the darkness like a prayer. Neither man spoke again for some time, each lost in contemplation of what might lie ahead for themselves, for their order, and for the secret they had sworn to protect with. There lives. Paris, September 1307. Autumn mist clung to the Seine, like a shroud as Guillaume, de Nogret's barge, glided silently toward the Isle de la Cite. The first light of dawn had yet to break the eastern horizon, and Paris slumbered, unaware of the meticulous machinery of betrayal being set in motion throughout France. Nogret sat rigid in the stern, a leather portfolio clutched to his chest. Inside lay the final orders for what would become known to history as the Templar. Purge arrest warrants for every Knight Templar in France could be executed simultaneously on Friday, October 13th, now just 1 month away. The barge bumped gently against the private dock below the royal palace. 2 guards materialized from the mist, recognizing the king's seal on the vessel, and helped Nogret disembark. "His Majesty awaits you in his private study," the captain of the guard murmured, leading Nogret through a small postern gate and up a narrow, spiral staircase designed to allow the king's most discreet visitors to come and go unseen. Philip was already awake, standing before a crackling fire despite the relatively mild September morning. He did not turn when Nogret entered, merely asking, "Is it done?" "Yes, Your Majesty. Sealed orders have been dispatched to your seneschals in every province." Nogret approached, the leather portfolio open to reveal the master document bearing Philip's royal seal. "They are to be opened only on the eve of execution. None know the contents save those in this room." Philip turned at last, the firelight casting his handsome features in sharp relief. "And the charges, they are compelling?" A thin smile creased Nogret's normally impassive face. "Most compelling, sire. Heresy, blasphemy, obscene rituals, denial of Christ, idol worship, unnatural acts between knights. The full litany of abominations. Evidence. Testimonies have been secured from former Templars' men expelled from the order for various infractions. They have proven most cooperative, especially when offered immunity and a small pension." Nogret closed the portfolio with a satisfied snap. "Once we have the Grand Master and his senior knights in custody, the Inquisition will extract confessions that will leave no doubt, even in the mind of our puppet Pope." Philip nodded slowly, returning his gaze to the flames. and preparations to secure their treasury? In place, sire. I have personally selected the men who will enter their Paris compound. They have detailed instructions on which documents to secure before the Templars can destroy them. Good. Philip's voice dropped to little more than a whisper. I want everything, Guillaume. Not just their gold and lands, but their secrets. Especially those. Nogret's eyes narrowed slightly. You truly believe the rumors that they possess holy relics? Forbidden knowledge? I believe they have spent 2 centuries amassing more than mere wealth. Philip's long fingers tightened on the mantelpiece. Why else maintain their presence in the East long after Jerusalem was lost? Why these mysterious conclaves that our spies cannot penetrate? There is something, Guillaume, something beyond mundane power, and I mean to possess it. A log shifted in the fire, sending a shower of sparks upward. In the momentary flare of light, Nogret caught a glimpse of something in Philip's eyes that might have been fear or obsession. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the king's usual cold calculation. 1 month, Philip said, straightening. 1 month until every Templar in France finds himself in chains. See that nothing alerts them to our plans before then. As Nogret bowed and backed from the royal presence, he couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that he glimpsed something in the king that went beyond avarice or political calculation, something that bordered on the fanatic's gleam. But such concerns were secondary. Soon the wealthiest order in Christendom would be broken, its treasures flowing into royal coffers and its secrets laid bare. Or so he believed. Templar preceptory, Paris, Saint-Jacques de Molay stood on the walls of the Paris Temple, watching dawn break over the city. The massive Templar compound occupied an entire district, a veritable fortress within the capital, housing not just knights but the order's administrative center and its principal treasury. Beautiful, even after all these years, observed Hugues. De Parade, the visitor of France, and effectively de Malay's second in command. The older knight had joined him on his dawn vigil, both men wrapped in their white mantles against the autumn chill. Beautiful, Jacques agreed, and dangerous. Paris has always been a nest of intrigue. I find myself missing the clarity of the Holy Land, where at least one knew who one's enemies were. Hugues chuckled dryly. The enemies carried scimitars instead. Of quills and sealing wax? Indeed, simpler times. They stood in companionable silence for a time, watching the city awaken. Smoke began to rise from bakeries and kitchens, and the first merchants were making their way to market. The men you summoned will begin arriving next week, Hugues said finally. All the senior preceptors, as requested, though I confess I still do not understand why you insisted on gathering so many of our leaders in one place, given your concerns about the king's intentions. Jacques turned to his old friend, his weathered face solemn in the strengthening light. Because some things can only be entrusted face to face, Hugues. Some burdens can only be transferred from hand to hand, eye to eye. The artifacts? Hugues lowered his voice, though they were alone on this section of the wall. Jacques nodded slightly. Among other matters, the knowledge itself must be dispersed. The cipher divided among trusted men who will carry it to safety should the worst occur. Surely the king would not dare move against the entire order? We answer only to the Pope, not to temporal authority. The Pope is Philip's creature, Jacques reminded him. And as for what Philip would dare, he gestured toward Notre Dame, its twin towers catching the first rays of sunlight. This is the king who had his agents assault and kidnap Pope Boniface at Anagni. The king who manipulated the College of Cardinals to elect our current pontiff. There is nothing he would not dare if it served his interests. Who frowned, troubled by the grim assessment. Then perhaps we should disperse our treasury as well, move our gold to our preceptories in England or Germany beyond Philip's reach, and alert him to our suspicions? Jacques shook his head. No, such an action would only precipitate the very move we fear. The gold is secondary, Hugues. Let Philip have it if he must. What we cannot allow him to seize is the knowledge and the bloodline. You truly believe the danger is so imminent? Instead of answering directly, Jacques reached into his tunic and withdrew a small parchment bearing no seal or marking. This arrived yesterday from our agent at court. Read it. Hugues unfolded the message, his eyes widening as he scanned the few lines of text. Seneschals, sealed orders, ... October ... This speaks of specific preparations for our arrest, I have no doubt. Jacques took back the parchment and held it briefly to a nearby torch, watching it curl and blacken in the flame. We have perhaps a month, no more. Then we must flee France, Hugues urged. Take ship for Cyprus or Rhodes, alert our brethren in other lands, and abandon 2 centuries of our sacred trust. Jacques shook his head firmly. No, old friend, I will not run, but I will ensure that what matters most survives, even if the order does not. As the ashes of the warning message scattered in the morning breeze, Jacques outlined his plan, a plan formed over years of growing suspicion and honed to urgency by recent intelligence. Senior knights would be entrusted with fragments of their most guarded secrets. Artifacts would be dispersed to hidden repositories throughout Europe, and arrangements would be made to ensure the safety of certain families in the Languedoc who, unknowingly, carried a bloodline older than the Church itself. And you, Grand Master? Hugues asked when Jacques had finished. What role do you play in this desperate gambit? Jacques smiled, a smile tinged with foreknowledge of what awaited him. I remain in Paris, of course. The shepherd does not abandon his flock when wolves approach. A sacrifice play, Hugues said quietly, understanding dawning in his eyes. A necessary one. Jacques placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. If Philip moves against us, he will want the Grand Master above all others. My arrest will satisfy his immediate bloodlust, and perhaps buy time for our contingencies to take effect. The sun had fully risen now, bathing Paris in golden autumn light that belied the darkness gathering around the Templar order. Below, in the preceptory courtyard, knights and sergeants went about their morning duties, unaware that their world teetered on the edge of annihilation. 1 month, Jacques murmured almost to himself. 1 month to preserve 2 centuries of guardianship. As they descended from the wall to break their fast with the Brotherhood, neither man noticed the figures slipping away from the shadows of a nearby storehouse. A lay servant whose primary loyalty was not to the order that employed him, but to the royal purse that supplemented his income. By nightfall, word of the Templars' urgent conclaves and hushed preparations would reach Margaret's ears, adding fuel to Philip's paranoid conviction that the order harbored secrets worth any price to obtain. The trap was set. The hunters and the hunted moved through their final preparations, each believing they held the advantage. But as with all great historical tragedies, forces had been set in motion that would exceed the control of either side, unleashing consequences that would echo through centuries yet to come. Rennes-le Château, Languedoc, early October 1307. Father Berenger Saunier stood in the doorway of the ancient church of Saint Mary Magdalene, watching the three riders approach along the dusty road that wound up to the hilltop village. Though they wore the simple garb of merchants, there was a military bearing to their posture that marked them as something other than common traders. Templars. The priest crossed himself, murmuring a brief prayer for what was to come. The lead rider dismounted at the church steps, removing his hat and bowing slightly. Father Saunier, I am Jean de Toulouse. These are my associates, Raymond and Bernard. You are expected, Berenger replied quietly, though I had thought there would be only one messenger. The times demand caution, Jean answered. May we speak inside? The priest nodded, leading them into the cool darkness of the small stone church. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that penetrated the narrow windows, illuminating faded paintings of saints and martyrs that adorned the ancient walls. When they reached the altar, Berenger turned to face his visitors. You have something for me? Jean glanced at his companions, who positioned themselves near the door to ensure privacy. From within his tunic he withdrew a small wooden box and a sealed parchment. From the Grand Master himself, Jean said, his voice barely above a whisper. He instructed me to tell you, the cipher remains as it was established. 3 points form the triangle. 7 seals guard the cup. 13 generations from master to apprentice. And the blood reveals all. Berenger completed the coded phrase, accepting the items with reverent hands. These are to be concealed as before? Jean nodded. The box contains relics that must never fall into unauthorized hands. The parchment holds updated information on the bloodline families in this region. They must be protected at all costs, especially in the coming storm. Then it is as we feared? Berenger's lined face grew grave. The king moves against your order? We believe so. Preparations are being made throughout France that suggest a coordinated action, perhaps within days. Jean glanced around the modest church. This place has guarded secrets for centuries, Father. It must do so for centuries more, should our order fall. Berenger's fingers tightened around the box. The renovation plans are already in motion. The symbols will be incorporated as instructed, visible yet invisible, speaking clearly only to those with eyes to see. And the families? They remain under my pastoral care. None suspect their true heritage, though they maintain the traditions passed down through generations. Berenger moved to the altar and knelt briefly. The woman Marie de Negre de Ball, she carries the purest line. Her daughter shows the signs as well. Jean nodded, satisfied. Remember, should the worst occur, you are to have no further contact with Templar Knights. Your role is to preserve, not to fight. I understand my duty, Berenger said simply. May God protect you and your brothers in the days ahead. As the 3 disguised knights prepared to depart, Jean added, one last thing. Should anyone come seeking knowledge of the bloodline or the artifacts we have entrusted to this place over the years, You are to reveal nothing, not even under threat of death. Not even to the church? Berenger asked, though he already knew the answer. Especially not to the church, Zhang replied grimly. What we protect predates the church as it now exists. Remember that, Father, when the storm breaks? After the riders had departed, taking a different road from the one they had arrived on, Berenger knelt alone before the altar. From beneath a loose flagstone, he removed an ancient clay jar inscribed with symbols older than Christianity itself. Placing it beside the newly delivered wooden box, he whispered a prayer in a language that had not been spoken, commonly in the Languedoc for centuries. The ancient bloodline and the knowledge it protected would survive here, hidden in this remote corner of France, while elsewhere the Templar order faced annihilation. This was his sacred trust, passed down through generations of guardians who had maintained their vigil in secret, keeping faith with a truth too dangerous for the world to know. Rising, Berenger carefully returned the artifacts to their hiding place, ensuring the flagstone was perfectly positioned to avoid detection. Then he moved to the church entrance and gazed out across the rugged landscape of the Languedoc, where ancient heresies had flourished and been brutally suppressed, where old knowledge had survived in whispers and coded references. The storm was coming, but this land had weathered storms before, and its secrets had endured. Paris, night of October 12th, 1307. The autumn wind moaned through the narrow streets of Paris like a soul in torment as Jacques de Molay completed his final preparations. In his private chamber within the Paris temple, a Grand Master knelt before a small altar, a single candle illuminating the ancient crucifix that had accompanied him from Jerusalem to Cyprus to France. "Not my will, but thine," he whispered, echoing words spoken in another garden, another night of betrayal, centuries before. A soft knock interrupted his prayers. "Enter," he called. Rising stiffly, Geoffroy de Charny slipped into the room, his face taut with tension. "It is confirmed, Grand Master. Royal troops are assembling throughout the city. They move at dawn." Jacques nodded, unsurprised. "Our preparations?" "Complete. The last messengers departed an hour ago, bound for Scotland and Portugal. The documents have been dispersed as you instructed." Geoffroy hesitated. "There is still time for you to leave, Grand Master. A fast horse waits at the postern gate. You could reach the coast by—" Jacques raised his hand, silencing the suggestion. "My place is here with our brothers who cannot escape. The shepherd does not abandon his flock when wolves approach." Resignation settled over Geoffroy's features. "Then I stay as well." "No." Jacques moved to his writing desk and withdrew a sealed parchment. "You have one final mission, perhaps the most important of all. This must reach Bernard de Villars at our commandery in Roussillon. It contains the final piece of the cipher, the key that unlocks all other fragments." Geoffroy's eyes widened. "Grand Master, I cannot leave you to face." "You can, and you will," Jacques interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. "This is not about loyalty to me, Geoffroy, but to our sacred trust. If the cipher is lost, 2 centuries of guardianship will have been for nothing." After a moment of internal struggle, Geoffroy bowed his head in acceptance. "When should I depart?" "Now." While darkness still offers some protection, Jacques pressed the parchment into his lieutenant's hands. "Travel alone. Avoid main roads. Trust no one you do not personally know. And if I am captured, destroy the document." Remember as much as you can. The bloodline must survive, Geoffroy. It is all that truly matters now." The two knights embraced briefly, the weight of their shared burden creating a bond beyond words. Then Geoffroy turned to leave, pausing at the lee door. "History will remember what happens tomorrow," he said quietly. "Will it remember the truth?" Jacques smiled sadly. "Perhaps not for centuries, but truth has patience, my friend. It waits in stone and blood, in symbol and song, for those with eyes to see and ears to hear." After Geoffroy had gone, Jacques moved methodically around his chamber, destroying any documents that might endanger others or reveal locations of Templar repositories. When he had finished, he opened a small chest beside his bed and removed two objects: a simple wooden cup of ancient design and a vial containing what appeared to be dried blood. "Not yet," he murmured, returning them to the chest. "The time has not yet come." He donned his white mantle one last time, the red cross over his heart like an emblem of the sacrifice to come. Then he knelt again before the crucifix, preparing his soul for what dawn would bring. Outside, the wind continued its mournful keening, as if the very air knew what tragedy approached with the morning light. Throughout Paris and across France, other Templars prepared as best they could, some suspecting what awaited them, others blissfully ignorant of the king's betrayal. And in the Louvre Palace, Philip the Fair gazed out at the dark city, imagining the wealth that would soon flow into his coffers, and the secrets that would soon be his to command. None, neither the hunters nor the hunted, could foresee how the events of the coming day would echo through centuries, creating a mystery that would captivate minds and hearts long after they had returned to dust. In his final hours of freedom, Jacques de Molay found a strange peace descending over him. Whatever happened to him, whatever tortures or humiliations awaited, the greater mission would continue. The bloodline would endure, protected by a network of guardians who would pass the truth from generation to generation until the time was right for its revelation. "Thy will be done," he whispered into the darkness, as the candle guttered and went out. The night before Jacques de Malay's arrest stretched long and dark, a final moment of quiet before the storm that would sweep away the most powerful military order in Christendom. But in remote churches and hidden chambers across Europe, the light of their greatest secret continued to burn, waiting for the day when the last Templar bloodline would finally reveal what the Church had tried to erase forever: artifact. This continuation maintains the same cinematic, suspenseful style of the original story, following the political intrigue between King Philip IV and the Templars as the trap closes around them. I've preserved the atmospheric descriptions, character development, and hints about the mysterious Templar secrets and bloodline without resolving all the mysteries. The narrative continues exactly from where you left off, completing Chapter 5, the Spider and the Knights, and moving into Chapter 6, the Noose Titans. The story builds tension through the preparations for the Templar arrests, providing glimpses of both sides' perspectives and motivations. The continuation ends with a powerful cliffhanger on the night before Jacques de Malay's arrest, setting up the dramatic conclusion you mentioned in your requirements. Paris, March 18th, 1314. Dawn broke gray and chill over Paris, the early spring sun struggling to penetrate the blanket of mist that shrouded the Seine. On the Isle de la Cite, the small island that formed the ancient heart of the city, A crowd had begun to gather despite the early hour. They came from all quarters, nobles in fine garments, merchants wrapped in wool, peasants in rough homespun, drawn by the macabre spectacle to come. "They say the Grand Master of the Templars will burn today," a fishwife remarked to her neighbor, as they claimed a spot with a clear view of the platform being constructed on the riverbank. "Him and the Preceptor of Normandy," the other woman replied, crossing herself. 7 years they've been in the king's dungeons. Why execute them now, I wonder? "The king's ways are not for the likes of us to question," said a nearby mason, his voice low, "though I heard tell that the Pope finally signed their death warrant last year." More spectators arrived by the minute, the crowd swelling as word spread through Paris. Near the small bridge that connected the island to the left bank, royal guards took up positions, their red and blue livery stark against the misty backdrop. Behind them, a somber procession emerged from the narrow streets. Monks bearing crosses, royal officials in ceremonial robes, and finally, a wooden cart carrying 2 hunched figures. Jacques de Molay, once Grand Master of the wealthiest and most powerful military order in Christendom, sat with his back straight despite the chains that bound his wrists and ankles. 7 years of imprisonment had whitened his beard and hollowed his cheeks, but his eyes, those eyes that had gazed upon Jerusalem and commanded thousands, remained clear and piercing. Beside him, Geoffroy de Charny appeared more broken, his body bearing the visible marks of torture. Unlike many of their Templar brothers, these two had recanted their forced confessions, denying the blasphemies and heresies they had admitted under the Inquisition's instruments of pain. For that courage, they would now pay with their lives. The cart rumbled across the cobblestones, every jolt sending fresh waves of pain through Jacques' tortured body. Yet his mind remained curiously calm, focused on the sacred trust that had sustained him through the darkness of his imprisonment. "They know nothing," Geoffroy whispered, his voice barely audible over the crowd's murmurs. 7 years of questioning, and still they found nothing of what truly matters. "The blood endures," Jacques replied softly. "The knowledge is safe. That is all that matters now." As the cart halted before the platform, Guillaume de Nogret stepped forward, the royal seal hanging heavy from his neck. Though 7 years had passed since he had orchestrated the Templars' downfall, satisfaction still gleamed in his cold eyes as he unrolled a parchment bearing the papal seal. Jacques de Molay, former Grand Master of the Knights Templar, and Geoffroy de Charny, former Preceptor of Normandy, he announced, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, having confessed to heresy, blasphemy, and unholy practices, and having subsequently retracted those confessions, you are hereby condemned as relapsed heretics to death by fire. The crowd stirred, a mixture of bloodlust and unease rippling through the gathered spectators. Public executions were common enough in medieval Paris, but there was something different about this one, something that touched on deeper fears and uncertainties. These were not common criminals, but men who had once stood among the elite of Christendom, warrior monks who had fought for the Holy Land. Royal guards dragged the 2 Templars from the cart and led them up the steps to the platform, where 2 sturdy posts had been erected. Bundles of wood and straw surrounded each post, carefully arranged to create a slow, agonizing death dot as the guards chained him to the post. Jacques gazed out over the crowd, his eyes eventually settling on the distant figure of King Philip IV, watching from a draped platform across the river. Even at this distance, Jacques could feel the king's hungry stare, the look of a man who had seized the Templars' gold, but never discovered their greatest treasures. A priest approached, offering a final chance for confession. Jacques waved him away with his chained hands. "I confess only that the order of the temple is innocent of the charges laid against it," he declared, his voice stronger than seemed possible from his frail frame. "We are guilty of only one sin, allowing ourselves to be overcome by those who envied our wealth and feared our independence." Nogret signaled to the executioners, who stepped forward with lit torches. "Wait," Jack called, his voice cutting through the murmuring crowd. "Before God, I have one final statement." Nogret hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Jacques de Molay drew himself up to his full height, seeming momentarily to regain the commanding presence that had once led armies. When he spoke, his voice carried not just across the platform, but across the centuries to come. "Pope Clement, King Philip, false judge and faithless king, I summon you both to meet me before God's tribunal within the year. Let divine justice fall upon those who have condemned the innocent." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. To curse the king and pope was unthinkable, yet something in Jacques' voice, a terrible certainty, sent a shiver through even the most skeptical observers. Nogret recovered quickly, signaling the executioners to proceed. "The ravings of a heretic," he sneered, though his face had paled slightly. "Light the fires." The torches touched the kindling, and flames began to lick upward through the carefully arranged wood. Jacques turned to Geoffroy, meeting his lieutenants, eyes one final time. "Remember," he said quietly, 3 points form the triangle. 7 seals guard the cup," Geoffroy responded, his voice steady, despite the smoke beginning to rise around them. 13 generations from master to apprentice. Jacques continued, "And the blood reveals all," they finished together. The flames climbed higher, catching the edges of their ragged garments. Yet neither man cried out, their silence more unnerving to the watching crowd than screams would have been dot as the fire consumed the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar. Something seemed to pass from him, not just his life, but a power, a knowledge, a sacred trust that the flames could not touch. High above, a solitary eagle circled in the clearing sky, as if bearing witness to the end of one age and the beginning of another. From his viewing platform, Philip the Fair watched impassively as his enemies burned. Yet something in de Molay's curse had unsettled him, touching on a superstitious fear he had never fully conquered. He turned to his advisor, forcing a dismissive smile. "The words of a dying heretic," he said, echoing Nogret's assessment. "Nothing more." But that night, as Philip lay in his royal bed, the Grand Master's face appeared before him in the darkness, lips moving in that terrible curse. And for the first time since he had ordered the Templar arrests 7 years earlier, the King of France knew fear. On the banks of the Seine, as the crowds dispersed and the executioners doused the smoldering remains, a hooded figure lingered, watching until all others had gone. Only then did he approach the execution site, kneeling briefly to gather a handful of ashes from where Jacques de Molay had stood his final ground. "It is done, Grand Master," the figure whispered. "The blood endures. The knowledge is safe." Brother Antoine de Montbard, one of the few Templars who had escaped Philip's net, carefully sealed the ashes in a small silver vial. These sacred remains would travel with him to Scotland, where Robert the Bruce, excommunicated by the same Pope who had abandoned the Templars, had offered sanctuary to fugitive knights. There, in the rugged highlands far from Rome's reach, the next chapter of the Templar legacy would begin, not as an army of warrior monks, but as guardians of a secret that would, in time, reshape the very foundations of European thought. As Antoine slipped away into the gathering darkness, the last echoes of Jacques de Milay's curse seemed to hang in the air, a prophecy that would soon prove terrifyingly accurate. Kilwinning Abbey, Scotland, summer 1314 rain lashed the granite walls of Kilwinning Abbey, driven by a fierce wind that howled across the Scottish lowlands like a banshee's wail. Inside the Abbey's chapter house, 12 men sat in a semicircle, their faces grave in the flickering torchlight. Each wore a simple tunic bearing no insignia, yet there was a military bearing to their posture that spoke of their former lives. At the center of the group stood Antoine de Montbard, the silver vial containing Jacques de Malay's ashes hanging from a chain around his neck. Before him on a small table lay a parchment map of Europe, weighted at the corners with stones carved with curious symbols. "Word reached us yesterday," Antoine announced, his French accent still strong despite months. "In Scotland, Pope Clement died in April, a month after our Grand Master's execution. Murmurs passed through the assembled men, former Templars, who had escaped Philip's purge through luck, for warning or the sacrifice of others. God's judgment?" asked William Sinclair, a Scottish nobleman who had offered these fugitive knights sanctuary on his lands. "Perhaps," Antoine replied, "and if de Malay's curse holds true, Philip will follow before the year's end." "Vengeance offers cold comfort for all we have lost," observed Bonnard de Villars, the oldest among them. His gnarled hands traced the coastline of France on the map. "Our brothers burned, our order destroyed, our mission seemingly at an end." "Not at an end," Antoine corrected, his voice gaining strength, transformed. "Before his arrest, the Grand Master entrusted me with this." He withdrew from his tunic a sealed parchment bearing Jacques de Malay's personal cipher, the final piece of the greater puzzle. The men leaned forward as Antoine carefully broke the seal and unfolded the document. Inside was a detailed cipher, key, along with a list of names and locations spread across Europe. "The repositories," Bernard breathed, recognition dawning in his rheumy eyes. "And the bloodline families." Antoine nodded. "For 2 centuries our order has protected not just pilgrims and holy sites, but knowledge deemed too dangerous for common understanding, and a bloodline that traces its origins to the very foundations of Christianity. The Merovingian bloodline," William Sinclair said softly. "The descendants of ... Names need not be spoken aloud," Antoine interrupted. "Even here. But yes, that bloodline. Our sacred trust has been to protect both the physical evidence and the living descendants, until the appointed time." "And now?" asked a younger knight, one who had escaped France with only the clothes on his back. Antoine's fingers traced a complex cipher inscribed on the parchment. "Now we adapt. We survive. We ensure the knowledge and the bloodline continue under new guardianship." Through the long night, as the storm raged outside, the 12 men formulated their plans. The Templar Order as the world knew it was finished, but its innermost mission would continue under different guises. New brotherhoods would be formed, seemingly devoted to guilds and crafts, yet preserving the esoteric knowledge and practices of their Templar forebears. The operative stonemasons' guilds offer ideal cover, William Sinclair suggested. They already employ a system of signs, grips, and passwords to recognize true craftsmen. We can adapt our own recognition signals within their framework. And they build the great cathedrals, added Bernard. Perfect repositories for our symbols and ciphers, hidden in plain sight within sacred architecture. As dawn approached, Antoine unfolded a second document, a detailed genealogy tracing several family lines from ancient Judea through Roman Gaul to medieval France. These bloodlines remain our greatest responsibility, he said solemnly. Most. Concentrated in the Languedoc, though some branches have spread to northern Spain and northern Italy. They must be protected, though they themselves know only fragments of their true heritage. How can we protect them when we ourselves are hunted? Asked the youngest knight. Antoine smiled for the first time that night. By becoming invisible, by exchanging white mantles for stonemasons' aprons, by transforming from warriors to builders, from soldiers to scholars. He placed his hand on the ancient genealogy, and by ensuring this knowledge is never held in one place or by one person, we divide it and code it, scatter it across Europe in stone and glass, in manuscript and memory. As the first pale light of dawn filtered through the abbey's narrow windows, the 12 men swore a new oath, not as Templars, but as the first brothers of what would one day be called Freemasonry. Their hands joined over the sacred relics and documents they had salvaged from their order's destruction. From the ashes of the temple, Antoine intoned, a new brotherhood arises. Not for wealth or glory, the others responded in unison, but for truth and the bloodline, Antoine finished. Until time fulfills the prophecy. As they dispersed before full daylight could reveal their gathering, each man carried with him a fragment of the cipher, a portion of the genealogy, and a sacred trust that would be passed down through carefully selected initiates for centuries to come. None could foresee how their desperate improvisation, born in the shadow of persecution, would evolve into one of history's most enduring secret societies. Nor could they imagine how the symbols and traditions they adapted from their Templar heritage would eventually adorn lodges from Edinburgh to Philadelphia. From Paris to Cairo. In the weeks that followed, word reached Scotland of King Philip's death in November 1314, the third fulfillment of Jacques de Malay's curse. The king had suffered a stroke while hunting, lingering for weeks in agony before finally succumbing. Within a year, all 3 of his sons would also die, ending the direct Capetian line that had ruled France for centuries. Divine justice, the former Templars believed. Yet vengeance was secondary to their new mission, preserving what truly mattered until the world was ready to receive it. Rennes-le-Château, Languedoc, 1330, Marie de Blanchefort knelt in the small church of St. Mary. Magdalene, the cool stone floor pressing against her aging knees. 16 years had passed since the destruction of the Templar order, yet only now had she begun to understand the true significance of her family's heritage. Father Berenger Saunier, now an old man with trembling hands but sharp eyes, sat beside her in the empty church, speaking in a voice barely above a whisper. The man who visited last month, the stonemason from Scotland, he came to verify the bloodline, the priest explained. to ensure that what the Templars protected still flows in your family's veins. Marie's hand moved unconsciously to her throat, where a small pendant hung a simple design of two interlocked triangles that had been passed from mother to daughter for generations. "I have always known our family guarded a secret," she said slowly. "My mother spoke of it on her deathbed, but I thought it merely a local superstition, a peasant's fancy." Father Berenger shook his head. "It is far more than fancy, my child. Your blood connects you to the greatest secret in Christendom, a truth the Church has sought to erase for 12 centuries. From beneath the altar, the old priest withdrew a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by the hands of many guardians. Inside lay a fragment of parchment covered in Aramaic script, and beside it, a vial of what appeared to be dried blood. "This has been preserved since the time of Christ," Berenger said, his voice dropping even lower. "Brought to Gaul by those who fled persecution in Judea, guarded through the fall of Rome, the Merovingian dynasties, the rise of the Church's power." Marie stared at the ancient relics, her mind struggling to grasp their significance. "And my family? We are connected to this?" "You are not merely connected, Marie. You are the living embodiment of the bloodline." The priest carefully returned the relics to their hiding place. The Templars discovered this truth beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. For 2 centuries they served as guardians. Now that duty falls to others and to you. "What must I do?" Marie asked, a strange calm settling over her despite the weight of revelation. "Leave. Bear children. Pass the pendant to your daughter. When she comes of age, along with the knowledge that she guards something precious in her blood." Father Berenger took her hands in his. "Tell no one else. Not even your husband. The secret travels through the female line as it has since the beginning. And the Church, if they seek to erase this truth, the Church as an institution would destroy any evidence that challenges its authority," the priest said carefully. "But there have always been those within the Church who serve a higher truth. I am one. There will be others after me, watching over this place, protecting the relics hidden here." Marie rose, her decision made. "I will do as you ask, Father, for my ancestors and for those yet to come." As she turned to leave, Berenger added, "Remember, Marie, 3 points form the triangle." Without hesitation, she responded, "7 seals guard the cup. 13 generations from master to apprentice," the priest continued. "And the blood reveals all," Marie completed, the words coming to her as if from ancient memory dug outside the small church. The Languedoc sun bathed the rugged landscape in golden light. Marie paused on the steps, gazing across the valley toward the distant peaks of the Pyrenees. How strange to think that these remote hills harbored a secret that could shake the foundations of Christendom. As she descended toward the village, she did not notice the figure watching from the shadows of a cypress grove, a man who had journeyed from Scotland to confirm that the bloodline still flowed in the veins of the families the Templars had once protected. Jan Sinclair, son of William, made the sign of the compass and square, a gesture that would have been recognized by former Templars, but appeared innocuous to uninitiated observers. The bloodline was secure, the knowledge preserved. The great work continued, despite the flames that had consumed Jacques de Molay 16 years earlier. In his journal that night, Guillaume wrote a single-coded entry. "The vine still grows in ancient soil. The rose blooms unseen." What was hidden? and blood and stone shall remain until the appointed time. Those cryptic words would, centuries later, launch a quest that would unite the final strands of the Templar legacy and unleash forces that had remained dormant since the fall of Jerusalem.